1,000 planes? Where the heck did you get 1,000 planes? Students, but... And what difference does it make? Well, yeah, I guess... No, you're right. The planes are planes. 1,000 planes. Hey, awesome. Wow. May 30th, 1942. 2 weeks ago, the Soviets preempted a German offensive and attacked first. And now the Germans do the same, but in North Africa. This week, Rommel strikes again. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Germans launched that preempted offensive in Ukraine, and by the week's end had not only stopped the Soviet offensive, but encircled 250,000 Soviet troops. Japan's plans for an upcoming attack against Midway Island were cracked and revealed by Allied codebreakers, and the Allies furthered plans to attack the Axis in North Africa in just a couple weeks' time. But those plans are literally blown up this week as the Axis beat them to the punch. The Allies have the edge in pure force. The Germans and the Italians have 400 and 230-ish tanks and are short of infantry. The Allies have some 850 working tanks and some 150 in reserve. In Phase 1 of his operations, Axis commander Erwin Rommel attempts to crack the British position from the rear. Yep. See, on the 26th, Ludwig Kruel takes German and Italian artillery and infantry and closes in on the Gazala line, where they're going to make a big noise as a decoy. Rommel heads southeast. British armored cars reported that a heavy concentration of enemy vehicles was moving in the direction of Bir Hakeim, but neither Ritchie nor Norrie made use of this immensely valuable information. Stephen Sears writes that a British officer on patrol reported to headquarters, "Looks like a brigade of Jerry tanks coming." It's more than a brigade. It's the whole bloody Afrika Korps. And it was indeed some 10,000 total vehicles. Sears adds, for some reason, 8th Army headquarters was slow in getting and analyzing such reports. This is Rommel's Moonlight Ride, a mechanized dash around the Free French positions at Bir Hakeim. Early on the 27th, these units overrun the 3rd Indian Brigade south of Bir Hakeim and forced the 7th Motorized Brigade to Bir Gubi, and the southern flank of 8th Army lies open. Willoughby Norrie still thinks the enemy will launch an attack in the center and does not allow Frank Messervy's request to take up new positions with all the armor. The 4th Armored Brigade is sent to help the Indians, though, but after fighting with the 15th Panzers, it's driven back beyond El Adem to the Bel Hamed base. 7th Armored Headquarters is attacked by surprise, and Messervy himself is taken prisoner. He will escape, for real, in less than 2 days, having removed all rank insignia and convincing the Germans that he's just an orderly. But his division is without real command for that time, since 8th Army doesn't believe the reports that the 7th Armored units have been scattered. However, for the whole day's work, though it sounds good for Rommel so far, just by what I said, and some of his units have even reached the Trig Capuzzo track, he has lost a third of his tanks. He's lost contact with the 90th Light Division, and the remaining tanks of 15th Panzer are low on fuel. The Italian Ariete Division has been pushed back at Bir Hakeim, the Trieste Division is still navigating the Gazala line minefields, and the Axis in general are dispersed away from their supply lines. Rommel had not smashed their armor nor broken their ability to reorganize. In fact, when he looked at his situation on a map, it looked precarious. That night, the Panzer Armee commander confided in his journal, "Our plan to overrun the British force behind the Gazala line had misfired. The opposition was much stronger than expected." Well, Rommel is not one easily discouraged. So on the 28th, they keep up the attack. But now, the 15th Panzers completely run out of fuel. Ariete is hit harder, and 90th Light is run off from El Adem. That day also ends with the Allies capturing Rommel's battle plans. Okay, Rommel does get a little good news, though. The Italians have made a little hole in the minefield to the left of the Free French on the Gazala line, and they're slowly opening up a shorter supply line through the gap that they can fairly easily protect. By mid-morning on the 29th, Rommel has refueled the 15th Panzers, and this day, he also manages to get his forces grouped again. The Deutsche Afrika Korps, 90th Light, and Ariete divisions are now between Trig Capuzzo and Trig El Abd. He's also changed plans, and the attacks northward, supported by landings on the coast, are cancelled. He's going to play defense for the moment, keeping the British armor at bay with an anti-tank and artillery screen to the east. He was convinced he had the measure of the situation, confiding in his journal that he foresaw that the British mechanized brigades would continue to run their heads against our well-organized defense line and wear them down in the process. That is pretty much what happens. For later in the day, Norrie does attack to try to crush Rommel against the rear of the Gazala line. But the attack is disjointed, not concentrated. The fighting is still very bloody, but the British get a bonus when they manage to capture General Cruel. You would think that this would disrupt things, but just by chance, regional Luftwaffe commander Smiling Albert Kesselring happens to be at Cruel's headquarters when word of the capture arrives, and he just immediately steps in and takes charge until they can find a proper replacement. On the 30th, Rommel is withdrawing and consolidating his forces towards the gaps in the minefields. The problem with this is the enemy box created by the 150th Brigade, backed with 30 tanks. See, Rommel really has to eliminate them because their artillery covers the gaps in the minefields, so supply right now can be done only at night. The 150th, though, is cut off from the rest of 8th Army. So the second phase of the Battle of Gazala, the fighting in the Cauldron, which is where Rommel's forces are grouped, begins as the week ends. Another Axis offensive is scheduled to take place next week, actually, in the Pacific Ocean. The Americans are aware of the Japanese plans, though, as we saw last week. And Hypo Intelligence Chief Joe Rochefort tells Pacific Fleet Commander Chester Nimitz on the 24th that Dutch harbor in the Aleutians will be attacked June 3rd, and the Japanese carrier strike force would attack Midway Island on the 4th. Carrier Task Force Commander Bull Halsey surprises Nimitz by recommending Cruiser Division Commander Raymond Spruance to Nimitz to now command the American carrier force. Halsey has fallen so ill with psoriasis that he's lost 20 pounds and can barely sleep with all of the itching. Still, this is pretty selfless, but Nimitz appreciated that Spruance, with his reputation for sound tactical judgment and level-headedness, would be a good commander for what promised to be the most crucial operation ever undertaken by the U.S. Navy. On the 26th, Task Force 17, which fought the Battle of the Coral Sea 3 weeks ago, returns to Pearl Harbor, having also picked up carriers Enterprise and Hornet. Carrier Yorktown, which was damaged in the Coral Sea, arrives the following day. In a major feat of engineering, Yorktown is repaired in just 45 hours. The Japanese, I should point out, think that the task force ships have either been sunk or are still in the South Pacific. As for their ships, on the 25th, 2 light carriers and 2 cruisers leave Hokkaido under Kakuji Kakuta for diversionary raids on the Aleutians. On the 26th, Chuichi Nagumo and 4 of the 6 carriers of Kido Butai, the first Japanese air fleet, leave the inland sea. He has battleships, cruisers, and destroyers as escort. The next day, the Midway invasion fleet set sail from Saipan and Guam. Transports carry 5,000 men, escorted by cruisers and destroyers. The smaller invasion force leaves for the Aleutians from Ominato. On the 28th, the rest of the attack force sets sail. Combined Fleet Commander Isoroku Yamamoto is in overall charge of the whole picture, but here he is in direct charge of 7 battleships, 1 light carrier, cruisers, and destroyers. Nobutake Kondo's second fleet has 2 battleships, 1 light carrier, 2 seaplane carriers, and escorts. They are the occupation force and covering group. The Japanese plan is complex. Kakuta is to cover landings on the Aleutians before the main operation begins in order to make sure there are no American forces near Midway. Even without this diversion, the main forces which are to attack and capture Midway are expected to achieve complete surprise and finish the conquest before any assistance can come up. Yamamoto believes that once Midway is taken, the American fleet will come in force to dispute the capture. They can then be beaten before new American production swamps the Japanese. The plan is, therefore, for Nagumo's carriers to pound the Midway defenses and then await the American fleet. Kondo is to give close support to the landings, and Yamamoto's battleships are to be disposed in general reserve. I'll talk more about all this next week, but the plan is a series of interlocking offensives against targets, real and decoy, from the Marianas to the Aleutians, and is pretty intricate. Midway itself is to be invaded on N Day. This is 3 days after a diversion against the Aleutians. The day after the diversion, Nagumo's carrier force is supposed to soften Midway up, and Yamamoto's battleship force would be lying behind in wait. Nagumo's carrier chiefs are a bit worried that the main battle fleet is 500 kilometers away from them, which is too far away to help if things go south. Well, all told, the fleet will be in 6 different forces, and there are thousands of miles of ocean separating them. More potential flaws in the master plan emerged as the war games were played. It was apparent that there would be communications problems since the commander-in-chief would be at sea observing radio silence. But Yamamoto steadfastly refused to consider any postponement in his June 1st deadline to allow for more planning. In fact, Operation K, the seaplane recon flight, has to be canceled when the sub that is to do the refueling at the French frigate Shoals turns up there to find an American mine layer waiting, and the 13 submarines that are to encircle Oahu turn up a day late and miss the Pacific Task Force ships leaving Pearl Harbor, including the repaired Yorktown, during the second half of the week. So next week promises some action in the skies over the Pacific. But there is action this week in the skies over Germany. On the 30th comes the RAF's first 1,000-bomber raid against Cologne. The British managed this by scraping together all operational planes and training units, which are flown by both instructors and students. It is a success in terms of both effect and propaganda. 40 of the 1,046 planes are lost, and 45,000 people in Germany are made homeless. It has other repercussions beyond homeless Germans, though. Martin Gilbert writes, "In the Warsaw Ghetto, the captive Jews rejoiced. Cologne was an advance payment," Emanuel Ringelblum noted in his diary, "on the vengeance that must and shall be taken on Hitler's Germany for the millions of Jews they have killed." As for himself, after the Cologne affair, "I walked around in a good mood, feeling that even if I should perish at their hands, my death is prepaid." I will say more about him next week, actually. Something else that the Germans did not see coming happens this week. On the 27th, Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Reich Main Security Office and a main architect of the Holocaust, is wounded in Operation Anthropoid, an assassination attempt planned by the Czechoslovak government in exile. This is covered in detail in our War Against Humanity series and our Instagram day-by-day coverage of the war. And here are a bunch of notes to end this week's coverage of the war here. On the 26th, the Free French land on Wallis and Futuna and take the islands from the Vichy French. U.S. Marines land there the 29th. On the 26th, the London meetings I talked about last week bear fruit, and an Anglo-Soviet treaty is signed. Neither country will sign a separate peace with Germany. On the 27th and 29th, Jews in Belgium and France are required to wear the yellow badge and yellow Star of David. The Germans launch Operation Hanover this week, which is to try to clear Soviet partisan forces from the Bryansk-Vyazma Railway. This lasts basically all week and sees over 40,000 German troops search for an estimated 20,000 partisans. Many thousands are captured and killed. Also, concerning the German counteroffensive that had such success last week, on the 25th, Soviet attempts to break out of the encirclement near Kharkov begin, but they have no AA guns, and the Luftwaffe has total air supremacy and rains 2-kilo butterfly cluster bombs down on them, and they die by the thousands. The open flat terrain and clogged roads are easy targets for German artillery. By the 29th, the Germans have taken some 250,000 prisoners west of the Donets. Red Army Southwestern Front Commander Semyon Timoshenko officially calls off any and all Soviet offensive maneuvers for the whole front the 28th. though they had pretty much stopped at the beginning of the week. The Barvenkovo mousetrap and the whole Battle of Kharkov are major setbacks for the Soviets. Red Army commander Georgy Zhukov will, in his memoirs, blame Joseph Stalin for the failures for underestimating the danger posed by the German armies in the southern sector and for not concentrating any reserves down there. Actually, breaking the timeline totally, Nikita Khrushchev will make his famous speech to the 20th Party Congress in 1956 that denounces Stalin's purges and sets the template for a less repressive period of de-Stalinization in the USSR. He talks about the battle in that speech, and he was the military commissar there. When an exceptionally serious situation for our army developed, we correctly decided to drop an operation that would have threatened our army with fatal consequences. We communicated this to Stalin so that the enemy would be prevented from liquidating a sizable concentration of our army. Contrary to common sense, Stalin rejected our suggestion, despite the fact that at this time, many army concentrations actually were threatened with encirclement and liquidation. And what was the result of this? The worst we had expected. The Germans surrounded our army concentrations, and as a result, we lost hundreds of thousands of our soldiers. This is Stalin's military genius. This is what it cost us. Funny enough, Joseph Stalin played a part in a major Soviet military disaster over 20 years before this. Check out this Between Two Wars Season 1 episode on the Polish-Soviet War and see how. And check out the Time Ghost Barracks to see our line of collectibles. All sorts of cool Time Ghost stuff, mugs, t-shirts, posters, and all that. It'll be here somewhere, I think, and there's a link below. And our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Bradley White. Is it White or Wright? White. It is White. Bradley White. Spelled W-I-G-H-T. If you play Dungeons & Dragons, you know what those are. The Army, the Time Ghost Army, has been financing all of our productions, and you can see that they are growing in number and size. And so is the Army. And you too can join at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.